you here. And as you see, Kevin is not on his own tonight. To his left, yes, something like that. Yeah, I'm getting my directions right. Is Jack Gady. Jack has been our youth ministerial intern this year. He's been working with Youth Souls, our youth program, and is going to be transitioning into being our year-long intern in this upcoming year. The MUUSJA intern for Justice and Religious Leadership. Jack, I will tell you a little bit more about himself in a minute, but we wanted to do sort of a passing of the torch tonight with the two of them, because Jack will be the one hosting these calls next year. We are going to take a hiatus during summer because so many of us travel and don't want to be inside on a computer at 7 o'clock on a beautiful evening. And so we're going to be taking these back up in September, and Jack will be our convener of these calls. I want to mention, too, that Jack's internship is being made possible by a partnership with the UU Service Committee. Those of you who are in congregations have probably gotten to know them through various different projects and things that they do. But they are launching a new program called the Justice Building Innovators Program. And in this program, they provide training and connection and resources and mentoring to social justice leaders, most of whom are congregational volunteers. But a few of them are interns or volunteers with the state advocacy networks around the country. And we are thrilled to be doing this partnership with the UUSC in this coming year, and they have provided some of the funding that makes Jack's internship possible. So you'll learn more about that as we go along. But I just wanted to give a word from our sponsor for that piece. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Jack just to give a brief introduction of himself, and then we'll hear from both of you.
Thank you, Ashley. Well, Ashley said, I'm Jack Gady. I just finished up my third year at United Theological Seminary here in the Twin Cities, and I will do a final year this coming year. I'm both nervous and excited about that. I kind of don't want things to end because that means I have to start a new phase, but it's time. I'm from northern Minnesota originally, Grand Rapids, and I came down for college forever ago. And let's see, I am very much looking forward to doing either college chaplaincy or parish ministry with my future, probably and hopefully starting with college chaplaincy. And I have a big heart for social justice. So working with Ashley and MUUSJA now, what will be 2 years, is really helping my development, both just personally and ministerially. I don't even know, maybe one other thing about myself is I love puzzles. I love puzzles. I don't know why. It's like this thing in my brain. I love puzzles. So yeah, that's me.
Thank you, Jack, my lovely co-host for the evening. And just to kind of give a little bit of update about my next steps, so you'll both hear a little bit about this because you're both in convening calls as well. But as I'm wrapping up at the end of the month here with MUUSJA, I'm also wrapping up my time as a youth director here at First Unitarian Society, which is where we physically are tonight. And as those both come to an end, I will be starting up a clinical pastoral education internship. So I will be an intern chaplain at the University of Minnesota Fairview Medical Center all summer long for 10 weeks, 400 hours. It's going to be a nice little marathon at the hospital all summer with Ashley's lovely partner, Karen Hutt. So will be my supervisor. So I won't be going far, but I will be working there all summer. And then in the fall, I will be going far. I will be moving across the country to begin a 2-year ministerial internship with the First Unitarian Society of Brooklyn, New York. So that's my next step on my path through this seminary roller coaster. But it's been an awesome year to be hosting these calls. This is the first year we've done them. So we've kind of been experimenting all year long, and I believe that the experiments will continue next year. So we'll kind of be seeing how these grow and change over the over the coming months. So stay tuned. And as always, as you come up with ideas of things that you want these convening calls to cover, that's where we got several of our ideas throughout the year, was we heard from folks that they were really interested in a particular topic. So we're definitely interested in gearing them to our audience. So, and as we continue this moving forward too, we're recording these so that there will be kind of a building of the library of resources on the MUUSJA website. So those are available, as are several of our past sessions from this year. So if you missed something along the way, don't worry, it's being recorded. And the PowerPoint presentation is also up on the website as well. So if you want, you can take notes, but you don't have to get every single detail. Ashley said she'll be joining us. She'll be back with us in just a moment. But I think the next thing I will do is our chalice lighting and opening words. Actually, do you want to light the chalice while I read the words? This is the beauty of having two folks. Our chalice lighting words come from Deborah Folk, and they're from a book called Lifting Our Voices, which is a UUA resource. A chalice lit in our midst is a symbol of our liberal faith, a faith built on the foundations of freedom, reason, and welcome, a faith sustained by acts of kindness and justice, a faith that envisions a world flourishing with equality for all people, a faith that demands the living out of goodness, a faith that requires thoughtfulness, a faith of wholeness. This tiny flame is the symbol of the spark of all this within each of us. Here's our chalice for this evening. So with that, I want to open it up for introductions. We all have been on several calls, but I think just a quick introduction and check-in maybe. So name, what role you have with your congregation, what city you're in, and maybe just a really brief check-in of how you've been. And with that, I will start with Paulette. Let me unmute Paulette.
Hi, I'm Paulette Demers from Rochester, Minnesota. I co-chaired the Welcoming Congregation task force. This year we're concentrating on LGBTQ issues, and also we've taken on class consciousness, where we're going to do a lot of focusing this year on those two in our committees. So that's the capacity, and I'm also the communications chair for the church also. So
great. And how are you? Do a brief check-in.
I'm frazzled. I feel this feels nice. It feels nice to be able to just sit and absorb.
And Mary, would you like to go?
Sure. My name's Mary Schnell, and I am a member of the Itasca Unitarian Fellowship in Grand Rapids. And we just renamed our group. We're on Facebook now, and we have a site so that people can see the events that are coming up. And I'm the administrator. We have our fellowship is 21 people. And we had our last service on Sunday. And now we'll meet once a month through the summer and then start up again in September. And I'm feeling just great. Yep.
Thank you, Mary. Ashley, did you like to check in? Maybe need introductions, but.
Yeah, I am doing just fine. These convening calls are always happening when things are very busy and transitional in my house because of the time in the evening, so I always feel bad about getting pulled away, and I might have to step away for one more minute later in the call. But Yeah, it's a beautiful day in the Twin Cities, and I got to spend time out, a little tiny bit of time this afternoon in my garden, and watching things grow helps me to slow down and gain some balance when everything else feels a little bit up in the air or too busy. So today I was appreciating the sweet peas and the way that they're beginning to climb on the trellis.
Jack, how are you? We've already done our introductions, but
I'm actually quite well. One of my best friends had his birthday today, and so we woke up early, as we do on Tuesdays, and played racquetball at 6 in the morning, and then had a beautiful breakfast with some other friends, and had a good work day. And as Ashley said, it's really beautiful down here. It's really hard to be in a bad mood when it's just this perfect out. So for me, I'm still kind of riding that beautiful weather high. Yeah, and I'm just looking forward to a positive next 2 weeks. So yeah.
And it's obviously, as the Twin Cityites have been saying, the weather here is gorgeous, and that's not a bad thing. And then other than that, I've been out and about working at coffee shops. This is one of my days where I'm untethered for the most part, so I get to bounce around uptown in the various parts of town throughout the day. And sometimes I work with folks, sometimes I work on my own. It's just kind of nice to be able to be roaming as I work. So that's been my day today. Well, with that, I'd like to launch us into our topic, which, as you may have noticed, is called Putting It All Together, Planning a Year of Justice Work. So the way we're going to do this is I'm going to switch over to a full screen view of the PowerPoint, and then Jack and I are going to tag team the presentation. And then at the end of that, and Ashley's going to fill in any gaps that she has throughout the conversation as well. And then at the end of that, we have time for discussion. So the kind of format of the whole presentation, though, is we're presenting kind of a model for how to do this planning work. And then we're going to both give an example of putting that model into action in a theoretical, hypothetical congregation. And then we can talk through if you have specific ideas that comes out of this for you, or if there are questions, that sort of stuff. We'll have plenty of time for discussion. And if other people join us throughout, they'll be able to be added in to the conversation at the end. So with that, I am going to share my screen. All right. So, as I said, the title of our presentation, Putting It All Together, Planning a Year of Justice Work. The reason why we're doing this presentation actually falls into MUUSJA's overall key goals of one, convening, where we work to do things like these convening calls that bring together folks from across the region to work together and develop, as well as capacity building, where we learn skills or where we develop techniques to make our congregations able to do more justice work. So the advantage of a call like this is we're kind of doing both of these goals simultaneously, of bringing folks together from different congregations on this call, as well as talking through practical tools to hopefully help congregations do this work even more powerfully than they already are. A piece around this idea of looking at planning out a year of justice work is to really have two kind of a long-term goal and a short-term goal in mind. One is to create this concept of a justice-rooted congregation. So this idea that that justice work is not just programmatic. It's not only learning. It's not only action. It's really all of these things put together. And really, as we go through this presentation, we'll give examples of several areas that kind of represent what that kind of looks like practically. And then the short-term goal of this presentation is to help with that practical problem of needing to plan out the year around this time of year. So looking at how do these areas for the justice-rooted areas of justice-rooted praxis fit into, and we'll define some of these terms, fit into the life of our congregations over the course of a year, and how can you practically use these to really plan out our work and do that work even better than we already are. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jack to talk about exactly what that word praxis is.
Yeah. So, and Ashley will be able to help fill in any gaps that there are here for us. But the basic idea of this idea of praxis is sort of, as you see on the screen here, a cycle. So it's not just a progress, a forward pointing line, but actually a cycle where we do take action in justice work, and then after we take the action, we actually reflect on it, which brings us back to a sharper theory that enables us to then move forward again into a more strategic and effective action again. So it's not just go do a social justice thing and go home and don't process and learn from it. The important part about this praxis cycle, there's two ways you could not be aware of the praxis cycle and kind of not learn and do as powerful of social justice work. And one of those ways is to spend a lot of time thinking and just thinking and talking about theory of justice work, but then kind of getting stuck there, like trying to figure out the exact best possible way without making any mistakes. But then, the idea there is that you might get stuck fearing that you're not going to do it right. So this praxis cycle, this theory kind of helps us move past that, where we just go and we don't act, of course, like willy-nilly and irresponsibly, but with what you move forward and you follow the cycle through. And then another kind of, thing to avoid that this cycle helps us with is not is the part of just focusing on social justice actions without ever reflecting. So I think especially with UU congregations, there's a tendency to be very action focused, which is so great. But then if you don't add that piece afterwards of debriefing, figuring out and talking through what you've learned about it, what we could do better next time, and then actually incorporating that into the next action. So that's kind of what we're going to get at for the next 20 or so minutes is these 9 different areas of praxis that a lot of your congregations probably are already looking at these areas, but to maybe be more aware of the interconnection of them all and kind of the interplay between them. Ashley, do you have any other things to add about praxis before we move on to the...
I think that was a great recap. I think the one thing I would say is that concretely what this looks like usually is that you've got the congregation that loves to have a social justice forum every Sunday, and they do the book groups and they do the curricula, but doesn't have any community relationships. That's an example of a congregation that's sort of stuck in the theory part. We also have congregations that will we're at every protest, every social justice action, and that always happens outside of the church, and we never do the work of integrating what it meant. What did it mean for us to be standing next to our Muslim neighbors this week? Or what did it mean for our congregation to go to the Black Lives Matter protest last week? A really great example of a congregation doing praxis intentionally was recently First Universalist Church in Minneapolis. I guess that was maybe even a year ago. They were mobilizing people in the congregation to go and show up at a Black Lives Matter action in Minneapolis. And what they did is they started by asking everybody to come to the church beforehand to get some training to understand what was going to happen. It's sort of this theory piece, right? And they've been doing a lot of learning about racial justice. People got trained, and so they were prepared for the action. Then everybody went to the action together. And I think this was maybe some sort of, direct action, like a protest or a march. And everybody stood together and participated in the action together. And then they came back to the congregation afterward and did a debrief, where they talked about not only just what had happened, but what it had meant to people and what questions they still had. And that's, the sort of thing that any congregation could do, no matter what size you are, no matter what the activity is. It doesn't have to be a protest or a march, but that sort of thing, whether if you're going to build a house for Habitat for Humanity, or you're going to go testify at the city council, or, you're going to have an interfaith worship event or something, any of those things could be integrated into this sort of praxis cycle. And it doesn't always have to be right before and right after, but the idea of being in a continual loop.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Ashley. That was very helpful, actually. Moving on, there's 9 different areas we're going to kind of talk through. The first has to do with public witness and prophetic voice. So this is where the congregation is actually becomes very aware of their institutional capital, both their social capital, their political capital, not just financial, but their other forms of capital, and then really uses them to, witness publicly. So this might be a protest, it might be a solidarity rally or march, but then the one kind of element into this is it's not just the actual march itself, but we can step back, and even things like arranging a carpool to actually increase turnout at the solidarity action. And there's other forms too. It's not just being physically present at solidarity movements, but even things like writing letters to the editors, displaying messages of solidarity. So whether that's a banner, a button, a t-shirt, to kind of flesh out and fill out the public witness component in many different ways. Yeah. And then service and solidarity. This is an interesting one. So I think often we think about service and we think that might just be like the social service aspect of like, we're going to go social service, we're going to go feed the homeless, And in justice work, we often talk about that distinction between social service and social justice, where they're both absolutely important and need each other. But also if a congregation might focus too much on one, it might be at the detriment of the other. So to really kind of work hand in hand and talk, this is where that reflection piece comes in. If you are reflecting as a congregation about how, we're doing a lot to, for instance, feed poor or homeless people right now, but I also want to stop for a bit and think about how can we actually address homelessness? Like how can we contribute or in some way use our capital to fight just actually homelessness and not just feed the people? So after kind of giving that distinction, to talk about service and solidarity, this actually might take many different forms. And one of the possibilities would actually be, I know Ashley mentioned, some of the local Twin Cities clergy were called on to actually provide food for the leaders of a grassroots organization who don't have a budget for their meetings. This is like, we need to be sustained to keep doing the work that we're doing, but we need food to keep moving. So that is a way where like the literal work they're doing is service. It's just feeding somebody, but that's not the end of the goal. It's just a means towards that actual goal, the end of the justice work. So the idea of this kind of area of praxis is really about, like I have underlined there, strategically channeling the energy, really seeing that bigger picture. And other possibilities for this would be, for instance, driving workers who are on strike, who normally use public transit, or letting a nonprofit organization kind of maybe who is historically marginalized or who's up and coming use their office space for free or no cost. So a lot of possibilities for ways to be of service that are broader. Interfaith and intercongregational partnership. There's again tons of options for this one, but the awareness that we're not alone, that we're not doing this work alone, that there's many people out there who have very similar goals of justice than we have. And so to think about, we're out here doing this, but so are they. I wonder if we can work together. I wonder if that actually will increase our capacity, right? So again, this is a more complicated and nuanced area of praxis because it takes a very large amount of humility, and it requires both cultural and also, I guess I'd call it theological competency to really know how to interact with people of different cultures and faiths or theologies, to not maybe get hung up there, but to really find that common ground, to know the differences, to see them still and honor them, but then in that unity of vision and value to move forward in the work you're doing. So in this area of praxis, there's quite a few options, but one option could be to join an interfaith justice network, doing pulpit exchange or joint worship services with other congregations. A big one here is also one I've seen in practice at my church, First Universalist Church, is practicing saying yes when people ask you things. So if that's a neighboring congregation who wants you to partner with them, say yes, move into that space, even if it's scary and you don't know exactly what it will look like. That's where I think a lot of potential can lie.
And one other piece with this one that I think of too is how important relationship building is in this, and how lengthy that process can sometimes be.
Absolutely.
I think that in some of these other ones, we tend to really be about doing and getting things checked off a list and being done. But I think that this is one of them that this takes time. This takes time to develop in a way that some of the other ones that we talk about don't.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm actually really glad you brought that up. My example later is going to be about this a little bit too. But it's a really good point to make, where if you do, for instance, a service or justice project with a person of a different faith or a group of a different faith, to know that one action isn't just going to be like, oh, now we're tight. Now we're like going to work together always. It needs a lot of fostering and developing, which we'll get into a little bit more later, which I'm excited about. Another area of praxis here is worship, ritual, and celebration. So this one's interesting because I think my tendency might be to kind of, I guess, to wonder about this one. Like how can worship and rituals be justice building? And then where my mind goes right away is in kind of those interfaith aspects, and to understand that many different people of different communities and faiths and backgrounds find value in ritual and in celebrations. And so to find that the relationship building and the fun aspect of those celebrations, I mean, this is where relationships can get built, from which justice can happen. So I guess the main things I want to highlight, there's just so many options. I mean, you can hold vigils, you can really reflect justice concerns in your worship service, in your liturgy, not just in the sermon, but in prayers, in the readings you do. Having a kind of a neighborhood or an outreach component to some of your own congregational social activities, and even inviting community partners from various fields of justice or social work into your pulpit to speak about anything. It could be their area, but it could be other things too, to really share their passion and to learn from them. There's a lot in this area this is a rich area. I get excited about it. So, yeah. And then back to Kevin for the next few.
Thank you. So this one, the financial partnership and fundraising, this one can be somewhere I think we sometimes shy away from talking about money too much in our congregations. I think that we often perhaps worry about money in our congregations as we're proposing budgets and things like that, but really having this self-awareness about how the money that we gather in our communities is used, and leveraging this power to really look at how are we using that, and from the social justice perspective, how are we using those resources in a strategic way and a reflective way to further our goals long term. So really thinking about this, if we're going to be passing the plate on a Sunday morning, thinking through how is that feeding the same or working towards the same ends as some of the other work we're doing in social justice or within the congregation. So really kind of thinking about how these things are fitting, how the financial pieces are fitting in with these other aspects of community life. So we're not passing the plate for this organization and then going out and doing this work over here. Perhaps we're putting that all together in that planful way when we look forward to the year, and really think through like, oh, how are the dollars that we're directing into the community, or doing things like how does our budget match our mission, is something that several congregations that I know really think about. If you can really kind of see a congregation's priorities when you look at that budget, is there money set aside for developing leadership for justice? Is there money set aside for really focusing on some of these initiatives? Because it's one thing to say we really want to build the Habitat for Humanity house, but then to not put any money aside to do that program, that doesn't work so well. So really thinking through how does our budget as well as our fundraising goals really align to those justice priorities that we set as a congregation, and how is all of that connecting together. Another piece of this that I think is something that we don't often talk about is having that foresight of knowing people in the congregation or in the community that are kind of on a list of people that are ready to give to emergency sorts of actions, whether that be environmental emergencies or social ones. So if a big event happens, like a Black Lives Matter sort of event, or something directly in the community that requires a swift action, to already have those relationships and conversations built with people within the congregation or the larger community, that they're like, yes, I'm willing to be on a short list of somebody to ask for $50, $100, $500, whatever the amount is, but just to have those people that are ready to go when emergency funding is kind of needed for those things you can't plan for as they come up throughout the year.
Can I make one brief comment about this?
Yes.
We have in our structure as Unitarian Universalist congregations some very middle and upper middle to owning class things, one of which is that we are pledgers and not tithers, which means that we create budgets a year in advance that don't have very much wiggle room in them. It also means that, to go back to something Kevin was talking about a minute ago, this idea of passing the plate, most people don't give very much money at all in the plate unless it's going out the door. So actually one thing we've seen is that congregations who give away the plate or split the plate make a ton more money. They collect a lot more money in that way than they ever did when it was just for the congregational budget, because most people are giving their pledges directly to the congregation in a monthly way. But this idea about flexibility can actually be built into a congregational budget. So, for example, a congregation could put a line item in their budget that's like a, social justice discretionary fund, where, you plan that there's a few $1,000s or a few $100s or whatever your scale is every year that is that sort of like, oh, okay, here's the thing that came up. We need some money to do this, and we can give it away. One of the ways that the things that, activist organizations or other partners have often reflected back to Unitarian Universalist congregations is how frustrating it is, because we have to send things through 5 committees and a board before we can act on them. And so before the crisis hits or before the need hits, thinking ahead to how can we be responsive to our community while also working within the structures that we have is an important thing to do.
Thank you. Yeah, and I think that the important part of that too is that idea of having those conversations ahead of time, so you know who the decision makers are before the crisis hits, is really, really important for many of these things that we talk about, but in the financial piece as well, definitely. So the next piece here is theological reflection. So this is something that we sometimes connect directly to our justice work, but sometimes we don't. So really thinking about this from the justice perspective of how is our social justice work literally the embodiment of our faith? How are we living out our values and our tradition by doing justice work, and then reflecting back on that and how that works? So a couple of ideas around this is really looking at having something like a year-long curriculum. There are several examples on the UUA website, and I'll get into in my example a little bit more about this later, but there's things like UU Wellspring that really brings in like how do all of these, how learning more about our tradition's roots, so that when we're doing this work, we can kind of see those connections of, oh yeah, this has been happening over and over again, of having Unitarian Universalists or Unitarians and Universalists step up in various times throughout history, throughout a long span of history. So it's not that we are the people that show up in the yellow shirts. We've been showing up in a variety of ways over time, and the yellow shirts are kind of the latest manifestation of that. So this idea of really making space in the year and in our work to do some of this reflecting back on, where does this impulse come from? And how is that tied to being a Unitarian Universalist specifically? Other ideas could be looking at taking an example from our coming of age and our youth programs of this idea of having folks that are committed to doing justice work stand up in front of the congregation and develop a credo for thinking through why they do this work. Why is justice work so tied into their Unitarian Universalist values? And really articulating that, taking that time to reflect on, why do I show up to the protest? Why do I do this work at the food shelf? Why do I do this? And how is being a Unitarian Universalist directly connected to that? This idea of really taking that time to do that work can be really, really rewarding, because there are times when doing justice work can really wear you down, and having a well of reflection and a well of faith in why you do this can really be that piece that sees you through the times when, oh, that action did not work, or that thing did not come together. Why do I do this year after year? Well, there are times that really having done that reflective work, this can be that place you go back to when times get kind of challenging, and when you're kind of questioning, why do I do this? You have already articulated the answer. So as some of these other ones that we've talked about, having some of this thought done in advance for those harder times can really be a source of either making things happen faster, or just having a deep sense of, here's why I do this. Another example of this is really thinking about, and this ties to the worship part, but how is theological reflection brought out in Sunday morning activities or in public ways in the congregational life? So are there moments that people are talking from the pulpit about why they do this work and tying it directly to what it means to them to be a UU? Because I think that's something that having other people in the congregation see can be really inspiring, as well as it can really help the person in the pulpit kind of say, oh yeah, this is why I do this. Having to sit down and articulate it is really the main part of this piece. These, as you can see, some of these will be related to one another, but the next one is pastoral care and spiritual formation. So this is really looking at, and if you think about the people doing justice work in the congregation, having that space to be cared for and to recharge and to go deep with the good and the bad of doing this work. That kind of, when you feel that you've been going, you need a place in a community, in a space to go back to and refill that well that I talked about in the previous example. And the other piece about this is thinking through, who are those go-to people that you have? Whether you have a minister in the congregation, a staff person, or a lay-led committee, who do you go to when, what happened today is really hard, or I'm really struggling with where to go next with work, either here in the congregation or in my personal life. So where do you really go to in those times when you need somebody just to talk to vent to, or to bounce ideas off of? Already having kind of created some of that work, or some of those go-to people, can be really important. One idea is kind of creating people that are justice chaplains, or people that are kind of identifiable in the congregation, that they've really worked, they've got some sort of training maybe, or they've done some reflecting on their own about what does it mean to hold space for people that are going through a tough time, specifically around justice work. Maybe they're people that have been longtime leaders in the congregation and are taking a step back from being on the planning committee, so they might have a little bit of free time, or they just might have some capacity in their lives to be able to be there for people, kind of in that moment when people step forward and say, oh, I need some help, or I'm really struggling with this. But this idea of having those people identified before you need them is similar to what some of these other ones are, really thinking and reflecting ahead of time on, what, doing justice work can be tiring, and at some point somebody's probably going to want somebody to talk to. Let's figure out who in our congregation either is equipped already to do that work, or would want to do some webinars about that, or go to a training or something like that, and really kind of put that out there as a need of the community. Mm-hmm. Oh, and the other piece of this, outside of the pastoral care, is this idea of spiritual formation. So similar to the theological reflection piece, is really having that space where people can go deep as to why they do this. So maybe it's less in the public. It might not be during a Sunday morning service, but it might be in a small group, similar to the program that we ran this year with our social justice small groups or covenant groups, where we spent a year together having a place to really reflect on, why do I do this work and how is it connected to being Unitarian Universalist? That could be done in the congregational setting as well. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in my example. The other piece here is also making sure that people know that they can take a step back. So this idea of step forward, step back, and having that be clearly articulated and re-articulated periodically, because I think people that do justice work are often the people that raise their hand first, that volunteer to do the thing. And really knowing that there's a time, and there's definitely a time and a place for that. And there's also a time and a place for saying, I've been saying yes a lot, and now I need to say not now. I need to take that step back and really just recharge, and making a kind of culture where that's okay and that somebody else will step forward. So that's kind of the idea here, is developing a culture of pastoral care and holding people that really helps people be able to do this work in a sustainable way for the long haul. So this next one is something that I think is more common, and something that we might talk about more in our congregations with a regularity anyway, but this idea of doing education, study, and trainings. And the thought here is, once again, to do this in a reflective way. So to bring it back to that praxis model of thinking, why are we offering this series of forms throughout the year? How are they tying into the other work of the congregation? What trainings or what book reads are we doing? And beyond that, how are they tying into, the actions that are happening, or the things that we're talking about on Sunday morning? Or maybe we have a long-term goal of working on a particular area in our community. Well, how are we offering trainings and education that line up directly with that, even if it's not the same topic? So if we're really working on environmental justice, maybe not every topic or every training in your congregation is about that, but are there skills building that support environmental justice work, but also support a variety of justice work? So an example would be like doing letter writing campaigns or learning how to lobby. Definitely supports that environmental justice work, but also supports all sorts of justice work and all sorts of actions actually beyond that too. So just thinking through, how are these various things that we're doing in the congregation, once again, feeding into a larger idea of what we're doing and why we're doing it. So a few examples of this, like I said, could be doing book groups, reading things like The New Jim Crow, other books like that, Race, the Power of an Illusion. So these ideas of reading a book, but beyond doing the book read, having that reflective piece of, why are we reading this book, and how does it fit into the other stuff that we're doing in the congregation, even if the connections might not be super clear or obvious, but stating them more explicitly, I think, is a big piece of this. The other piece would be bringing in outside folks. So this idea of having trainings that come in, or consultants that come in, and this will come up in a later one too, but that, it's not always able to be done by people from within the congregation. And sometimes this can be a really good example of how to partner with the community. So if you're really working on food justice in your community, maybe looking at what organizations or communities are kind of those frontline folks that are working on this, can come in and be your experts to help you as a congregation learn more. And how can that also perhaps be something to invite in visitors? They might not be members of the congregation, but they're interested in this topic. So holding that as kind of a community space as well. So the last one is perhaps one that can be nebulous. So it's institutional transformation. So, and this can be the piece that I think sometimes when we talk about systems and things like that, and changing those things, can be really hard to grasp. How do we go about doing that? But thinking through, what things do we have within our power that we can change or work to change? One powerful thing about being a Unitarian Universalist congregation is we're completely congregationally led. You know, our bylaws are our bylaws. We can change them. There might be a process. It might take several steps at whatever your congregation has said those steps are. But you can change the bylaws, as well as things like end statements in your when you're looking at strategic plans and things like that. You know, what are the goals that are explicitly stated that the congregation has, and how do they align with justice work and the other things that are going on in the congregation? So if you're saying that this is going to be an area of focus for us this year, okay, and is it going to be an area of focus for you next year and 5 years from now and things like that? Because many of the things that we focus on are beyond getting a certain ballot measure passed or beyond something that takes one legislative session. They take years and years. So having this idea that the whole congregation, the whole institution of the congregation can be a part of that work, and really thinking through how do the various pieces of that institution line up. So as I talked about with the financial piece, how does the budget line up with what you're saying you want to do?
Yeah.
How do the ways that we govern ourselves line up with the way we do? How do decisions about who is and is not a member line up with this? How does money and pledging fit into all of that? So these are big, kind of murky questions, but the idea that all of these things are changeable. You know, we have within our congregations, we're the ones that set that. The other piece of this is really looking at this from the higher level. So beyond a program or a year, but really looking at, do we have a way to reflect and audit what we're doing programmatically or institutionally for justice? So we definitely focus on audits around things like money, and we definitely look at our numbers around, are we growing or not in terms of membership? Well, is there a way that we can measure and look at the total work of the congregation and how that lines up with the things that we're saying we want to do around the areas of justice? And kind of the reason I'm wanting to end on this one before we go into our examples is that this is kind of where all of these areas of praxis fit together. Yeah. So this idea that looking at one or two or three or several of these areas as ways to be measuring, like, let's look at where we are now, where we want to be, and have a system in place where we check in at the end of each year. In the annual report of our congregation, there's a space that says, here's our justice audit. You know, there are ways that you can work that in throughout the year, that they're parts of the life of the congregation. So people would then be able to see after 3 justice audits in the annual report each year, oh, here's where we've made change. Here's where something's happening. You know, that might not always be rapid and change overnight, but this idea that you can start to chart that change is happening, and that can be really assuring to those folks that really like numbers, that really like to quantify things. I'm one of those people. I love a good chart. I love a good spreadsheet. So the idea of being able to see, not only do we have a plan for the future, but we can actually report out on our successes and sometimes our challenges too. Like, oh, this area we are not moving on. What's up with that? What's going on? Why is that happening? Can be a really good source of conversation. Like, it might be that some other big change has to happen that can't happen yet, but this idea that we know that that's happening now because we're actually tracking it. Once you have the data, you can actually decide what are you going to do with it, but you have to start to think on ways of gathering that data before you even know or can kind of see that that's happening. So with that, Ashley, did you have anything you wanted to add to the areas of praxis before we go on to 2 examples? Oh, and we can also pause here for questions from folks, since, you know, this is a natural break point. So questions.
Yeah, let me just quickly say that number one, this sort of 9 areas of praxis is it comes out of some work that I've been doing with some interfaith colleagues, actually around congregations that have a systemic commitment to racial justice, but it's applicable to all areas of social justice. The idea being that too often we see that there's, you know, like a social justice committee to where everybody says, oh, you want to talk about social justice? Go to those people. And it kind of gets siloed. The idea with these areas of praxis is that it's, you know, a far-reaching, deeply rooted commitment that a congregation has to social justice. And I also want to emphasize that it is a model, not the model. It's something that may be helpful, but is not necessarily the be all and end all. It's also something that takes a long time to get to. You know, this is not something where, like, when you're making your plan for next year, you want to say, okay, how are we going to do all of the things in all of these different areas to get there in a year? Because this is long-term work. This is more about, these 9 areas that we've identified are much more about being able to do some reflection on where you are as a congregation and take real stock of what's going well, what's not going so well right now, and then making a plan for moving forward. And so Kevin and Jack, I know, are going to lead us through some sample plans here in a minute, but we can pause for questions with that little caveat.
Any questions from the audience? No? That's totally good. And yeah, did you see did I see a gesture? One second, Mary, let me unmute you. I can't hear you. Mm-hmm. There you are. Okay, Mary, now we can hear you.
Yeah, well, that was going on. Simon came. So.
Hi there.
So now there's 2 of us.
Great.
Okay.
Welcome, Simon. So, we're going to now launch back into the PowerPoint piece if there are no other questions. And we're, like Ashley was saying, what we're going to do is actually just pick a couple of these areas of praxis and develop 2 different plans for a theoretical congregation for the next year. And this idea that even with a couple of areas of praxis, some of these are kind of lofty, big plans. So this idea that really focusing in on 1 or 2 can really just start to focus the work that you're doing, and to have just a way to say, are we making progress, or perhaps why aren't we making progress is even an excellent outcome for this sort of work, like just being able to identify that. Yeah. So with that, we will switch back to the PowerPoint.
And I just want to say too, in kind of choosing practice areas, I mean, I think an important thing is if you're doing, this really great social justice work, and then seeing these 9 areas helps someone say, oh, we don't really attend to this at all. I wonder how we can maybe incorporate this a little bit more in the work that we do. It's about kind of like potentially fleshing out and making more full some of the social justice work that you're doing. So
yeah, thank you for saying that. Before you launch in, the other piece is maybe the areas that you choose, the 1 or 2 are areas that you're not doing much in, and this is more like a stretch goal. So this is an area where we are excellent at doing at showing up for actions, at doing the protest. The public witness is an area that our congregation does already. Well then, maybe it's looking at a different area of praxis to be the focus for next year, or to be another area to work on. So you start to build out this work. It's not always grow from your strengths. Sometimes it's, we don't do this at all. Right. So maybe we should look at, why don't we do this, and how might we work that into all these other things that already are kind of humming along in our congregation.
Right. Or even another option is, if public witness is your strength, then in that public witness, who else are you meeting? And then could you then kind of bridge into an interfaith partnership very naturally, since you're already out in the public, maybe trying to do an interfaith partnership with those who are also with you. So there's quite a few different ways to kind of see these areas being helpful. So. All right.
Cool. So here's our 2 examples with theoretical, hypothetical congregations, but maybe you'll see things in them that you can bring back to your own.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm doing plan number 1 here, and I thought through the idea of kind of merging or marrying the interfaith partnership with the worship, ritual, and celebration. So I'm kind of going to paint a broad picture to begin. The goal I thought about was building stronger interfaith networks and fighting Islamophobia through relationships, first of all, but also education and celebration. So first of all, to kind of get at that understanding that interfaith means a little more than just ecumenical. So I think in some communities, an ecumenical movement is very much within Christianity still, a very sort of across denominations, but not really across faiths. So how to incorporate maybe someone of a different faith besides Christianity, or of no faith at all. So to kind of move towards that interfaith work more than just ecumenical work. And in some communities, that might even mean kind of challenging and pushing a bit on some of the Christian communities who want to be ecumenical but don't know how to go further. As Unitarian Universalists, kind of wondering how can we kind of bring our knowledge and expertise in that kind of, in Unitarian Universalism, we call it our big tent theology. How can we bring our understanding of that theological diversity to bear? So in that vein, how to include Muslims in interfaith events, and then how to fight Islamophobia is kind of going to be the goal of this praxis plan number 1. So to start, and this I should just say really quick, Ashley had asked us to make a 1-year plan. This could really easily be stretched out into a 2-year plan, because as Kevin mentioned earlier, relationship takes time. I mean, if you're really going to try to reach out to people of different faiths in your community, it's not a 1 month, oh great, we're there now. So absolutely think about this as a potential 2-year plan as well. But if you don't have 2 years and you want to do a 1-year plan, the caveat I'll give is, for my kind of timeline, I would put a lot of time in maybe the summer before this praxis year number 1 to really building those relationships and reaching out to various faith communities in your community. One resource that is, I think, headquartered down here but does a lot of Minnesota-wide education is called the Islamic Resource Group. So to contact them early, they come out and for free do educational talks, discussions, panels to educate local congregations, schools, really any forum. They are a really wonderful group I've worked with a couple times now, and they are just always willing to travel, and they really want to build relationships and to kind of destigmatize in a lot of ways and kind of debunk a lot of the misperceptions out there about Islam. So then one possibility would be to plan an interfaith Islam 101 event. So really bringing together many different congregations for an event that is about, let's unpack this together. Let's learn about not just what Islam is, but let's learn about Islamophobia. Let's learn about who our neighbors are and what they actually are facing, and how we can actually not just support them and befriend them, but how we can speak out against Islamophobia when we hear it. So one kind of, caveat or, tip I will give is, I love the idea of having this event be educational and relational. So I've been to one of these where the speakers themselves are very adamant, like, we'll do a small panel discussion, but we really want the roundtable discussions to be a focus. Like, we are going to get around small tables that are going to be purposefully integrated. We want Christians and Muslims and Jews and atheists to be talking and meeting each other, and not just sitting with their people, but really broadening what that definition is. So then moving from there would be a lot of options, but some of the options I thought of, maybe facilitating a monthly discussion, or even just a dinner night, like a relational oriented event. And one thing I've been thinking about a lot in my own research with Islam and my Muslim community here in the city is there's been, in a lot of the sermons I attended at mosques, there was a lot of focus on civic engagement and political awareness, especially with the anti-Muslim rhetoric right now in our political arena. So maybe those discussions every month or every other month could be around topics of, voter registration, and what does that look like? What does civic engagement look like? How can we maybe first talk about a lot of the common ground we have in politics and in civics before even getting to other discussions like faith and theology and, like certain social justice issues maybe we don't agree on, but we do agree on others. So to kind of start those conversations slowly, but to really let them build and be relational. Another suggestion would be to host some film discussion nights. Again, those could be just UU specific, but they could also be broader, to really look at some insightful movies, documentaries that really help educate and spur and kind of challenge prevailing thought, especially. And then to have discussion afterwards. So this is that kind of the reflection theory piece, but how it can also point to action and return again to more discussion. So, later on in the year, if you have a film discussion after having done action, you can kind of bring back to that film discussion, like, oh, the other day when I was at the October dinner with our Muslim neighbors, this is what came up, and and then another option, at least for those who are local to the cities or close, attending Muslim Day at the Capitol. It's a annual event that happens where Muslims gather and learn a ton more about civic engagement and be a vocal presence at the Capitol, and kind of learn and kind of not wield exactly, but to really build or flex the muscles of their political power in their capital. So then for me in this kind of example, where I was pointing was this worship, ritual, and celebration. And so in my mind, I kind of saw the almost kind of capstone work as these kind of big interfaith celebrations. And in my example, and of course, this is very open to adaptation, and you might not at all like this, and that's totally fine. But the ones I thought up of were doing one in December, one in May. And for me, the winter solstice service is a very special service, and it feels very UU specific. So as a UU congregation, if you're trying to kind of plan this interfaith work, to have one service that's very much like kind of authentic for you, and it's very a deep service, then that could be a really good choice for that work. So I guess in this idea of bringing in lots of different voices and different faiths to celebrate a basic thing like, hey, it's the longest night of the year. This could be potentially depressing. Let's get together and celebrate, let's light candles, let's sit in silence together. And what could that look like, broadening that out? But then another option then later in the year, in my example, is to do an interfaith iftar service. So iftar is the breaking of the fast during Ramadan. So in my planning, I kind of thought more with Kevin's help, if this were a 2-year plan, the first summer, the first Ramadan, I would definitely just go attend an iftar if invited. I know the Muslim communities here in the city are very, very open to anyone who wants to, any non-Muslims, come break our fast with us at 9 p.m., eat together, learn about Islam. And so finding that first, so that then by the second year, what you could do is in partnership with that Muslim community, say, we want to help plan an event that's bigger, that really has good interfaith buy-in from many different congregations. We want to celebrate with you in a pretty big way. How can we help? How can we help plan? How can we facilitate this? How can we make this happen? So again, it's a very relationship-oriented one, and that's, I think, why I like it so much. And I also just love food. So the act of food bringing us together, that for me was an important one. So moving on, there's also a few resources that could help with this type of plan. On the UUA's website, one of the Tapestry of Faith called Building Bridges is just a really good kind of starter for that interfaith work. But another one, thank you, is the Islamic Resource Group has a traveling art exhibit called Tracks in the Snow, the Minnesota Muslim Experience, which is, I don't even know for sure if it still is traveling because it was a few years ago, but if not, there's still some online resources for that, and that was just a beautiful possibility. And then last thing from my kind of plan number 1 here is just a roadmap for the year, so you can kind of see now the big picture. Going through, making those contacts early, really building the relationships and putting the groundwork in place early on, planning that Islam 101 event kind of as a kickoff to the year. And then for the majority of the year, doing those monthly discussions, those relationship building, maybe dinner discussions, film discussions kind of sprinkled throughout with those December and May interfaith events that are celebratory, have some of the rituals involved, and really kind of bring us together. So that is the kind of roadmap for what it could look like for a 1-year plan.
Great.
For those practice areas. So yeah.
And all of these slides are up on the website. So if you're thinking about tweaking or using some of these examples, they'll be up there too. So to give us time for discussion here at the end, I will go through this a little bit quickly here, and then we can always come back if there are specific questions. But so my idea here for a second praxis plan is looking at with the goals in mind of strengthening a core group of justice leaders in your congregation, and having that be done through providing support and personal growth opportunities that are also accessible to the whole congregation. So focused on a small group, but this idea that a lot of the things that are going to happen throughout the year, other people can attend. So it's all these resources are still also helping the whole congregation, or perhaps even outside community members, be a part of the work. So this piece pulls in 3 of the praxis areas, and I really think of this in terms also of the bigger praxis cycle. So looking at pastoral care and spiritual formation as a space to really focus on that reflection area, looking at education, training, and study as that place where we really go deep on theory, and then looking at service and solidarity as that action-focused area. So really kind of using 3 of these praxis areas as tools for really going deep on that 3-spoked wheel that we talked about earlier. So the pastoral care and spiritual formation piece would be really looking at that small group and developing a covenant group or small group ministry model for those folks. So thinking that there'd be a whole year-long program that would kick off in September, meeting twice a month, October through April, and that there'd be some program for leadership development and spiritual formation. And I'm going to give a couple of resources for what that would look like, but that one of those meetings each month would be structured. There'd be, we're doing this, we're working through a curriculum, or we're doing this thing together. And then maybe the other part is planning, or more social, or more of that pastoral care side, where people can really talk about and reflect on what's going on. The idea here is that you create that group in September, maybe around 6 people. So really thinking on who are those people that really want to go deep and commit to that time for an entire church year, thinking about their justice leadership. A couple of examples of what you might do with that would be the UUA, Tapestry of Faith, has this program on there called Harvest the Power, which has perhaps even more content than you would want to use, but you can really take it, download it for free, and adapt it. So thinking through what would we do 1 session a month for that many months, or looking at the program that we started this year, the MUUSJA online covenant groups, and having everyone that's in this small group sign up for one of those that are being offered next year that Jack will be leading, or looking at maybe all 6 of you are together in one online covenant group that's being hosted by MUUSJA, or somehow creating and adapting your own. So there's other resources out there like UU Wellspring, the Soul Matters online piece, which is actually part of the curricula that MUUSJA uses. So just thinking through this idea that, well, creating a curriculum might sound daunting. You don't have to create a curriculum. You can adapt one or take part in a training that's already happening throughout the year, and really use MUUSJA as a resource for that. So looking at the next spoke of the wheel, looking at education, training, and study, the idea that you could go have 2 training opportunities, one in October and one in March, that would really focus on a particular area. So in this example, October would be really learning about local welfare access and providers. How do people access those resources, and really perhaps bringing in people that are doing that work on the front lines to talk about, here's what we have in the community, or maybe here's what we don't have, but wish we did. Similarly, in March, looking at training about what are food deserts, how do we work to combat those, even because I think we often think, oh, there's supermarkets everywhere. Well, that's not always true, and exactly what's available and accessible to everyone varies from community to community. The third one ties into both of the other ones, and that's the service and solidarity piece. So planning 2 service opportunities, one in November and one in April, that would be the following month after the training, that would tie into the training that happened. So in November, it could be a food shelf service day and maybe a food drive, tying into the theme of Thanksgiving as well. But this idea that after learning about where are the holes in the welfare system, or how do people access that, also putting something into action that either helps supplement that or does something that is in direct support of that same work. Similarly, if you're learning about food deserts in the second training, looking at in April, doing a service day in a community garden, or starting a community garden, or something like that, to help combat the idea of food deserts. So this idea that you can grow your own vegetables and stuff like that, and making that another access point for healthy food. kind of pulling this all together into a roadmap of the year, starting in September with that small group social justice leader retreat. October through April, that group would be meeting regularly. Perhaps they're planning these trainings, or they're working through that curriculum, or maybe both, depending on how you want to structure that time together. October, you'd be providing that program for the congregation and maybe even the community, the wider community. November would be doing an action that ties directly to that. March would be the second program. April would be another action. And then in May, there would be some sort of celebration for that small group of people that had kind of been together for that whole year. So, and maybe they continue on and they do another program next year, or they continue focusing on these areas or something like that. One way to kind of grow these programs is to have that pilot group then break off and form, maybe they split into two groups and bring in more people to each of those groups. So this idea of building that in a sustainable way over time. So a lot of these pieces might feel like a lot to take on in 1 year. So maybe you do one training and one program, or one program and one action, and have the small group thing run. Or you can kind of tweak this to your own needs and interests of the people that would want to participate. So with that, we have a little bit of time left for discussion. We can go back over any of the things that we already talked about, or go into another area altogether. So I will hop back into video mode here. And if there are questions that people have, feel free to unmute yourself and let's hear what you have to say.
You just did such a thorough job that nobody has any questions to pose.
Or were there maybe one of these areas that you could see yourself using or employing in your next year?
I think for me personally, I feel like I wish I wish a lot of more people from the congregation or other leaders on the social justice could have been here. I guess I feel not really overwhelmed, but just kind of, I mean, these are all absolutely incredible ideas, and I don't know how I would begin to even talk about getting some of these things implemented.
So Paulette, I think there's two ways of framing it. One is like, oh my God, there's so much work to do. The other is, there are so many on-ramps, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think one of the things, and Paulette is in a congregation that's in an interim ministry right now, which is actually a really great time to be doing some of this long-term planning and visioning for social justice work. But, you know, I have the privilege of having a little insider information because I just did a consulting workshop down in Rochester. But one of the things that we did is we sort of outlined all of the social justice work that was happening in the congregation. And a suggestion that I might make is actually to take a look and see what you're already doing. Because, you know, I know from talking to you that you are already doing things in many of those kind of areas of praxis in a number of different issues. I want to say that, like, I think those areas of praxis are really interesting to think about. Like, where is social justice living in our congregation right now? Are we a congregation that always preaches about social justice but is never out in the community? Are we a congregation that loves those educational forums and has a harder time with interfaith partnerships? And just seeing, like, you know, doing an assessment of where you currently are is a great way to sort of get started, and then make plans for baby steps, you know, and I would start with the question, which of these things seems both challenging and exciting to us? You know, you cannot do everything, cannot do it all at once. But if somebody, you know, if as you're talking, everybody's like, oh man, we are so excited about really working on our partnerships, our community partnerships, that may in and of itself tell you that that's an area where you should put energy in the next year. And then you narrow down, you focus in on what does that look like in our context? What is the capacity that we have? What are the goals of those partnerships? I would also say that you can approach this from a flip side. If there is an issue or two that the congregation is really passionate about, this framework about those areas of praxis can be really helpful in saying, all right, so we want to work on this issue. We're already committed to this. What are all of the different things that we could be doing around that issue? So, and over time, you might find that there are 2, 3, 4 issues that become central to a congregation. And then you look at how are all of those issues showing up in those, how are you living into that commitment to that issue over time? My basic advice is know where you are realistically. Start with understanding what you're already doing, what's working well and what's not. And in fact, you guys have gone far down that path already. Mm-hmm. And then saying, so then what's the next step? What's the next, not what are all of the next steps, but what would be a bite that we could chew off for ourselves in this next year? And this is a guide to beginning to say, here are some creative, interesting things that we may not have thought of. Here are some areas that might be pushing our own comfort zone to grow into.
That sounds great. Thank you.
And I would say, this presentation is going to be available online. So maybe is there a group of people there that weren't able to be here tonight, but would be interested in going deeper on this? Like, oh, here's a model for at least looking at how do all these pieces fit together. Maybe it's even as simple as starting there. Let's watch this video. You can skip through parts of it if you want to then. You can go back if you missed something and all of that too. So this idea that that MUUSJA will be a resource in this work too. So it's not all, oh, now we have to figure it out all on our own. So that's something that we definitely don't want to leave you with.
Yeah.
Other either areas of further clarity or other questions, things that sparked for you?
I was just going to say that the 3 times that we meet this summer is planning program for next fall, so I could bring some of this up. Last year we read the UU book, The Common Read.
Mm-hmm.
I can't remember what it was called. But then we brought in a local judge, and we talked about incarceration and did a lot of that. So I'm sure they'd be open to this.
And maybe it's looking at that work that's already happened and saying, now what can we do with that?
Right.
Yeah.
How can we look at where do we go from here? And maybe this would bring up some ideas.
Yeah.
So it's not all having to come up with brand new stuff. Right. I think that's to bring up what Ashley said before, looking at you're already, I'm sure, doing a lot, but this kind of helps take stock or take account of what is happening and then seeing like, oh, we either are doing a lot in the study area. How do we make that into action? Or however you want to look at that.
And Mary, I would say, especially for a small congregation like yours, figuring out where the energy in the community is and who are the likely partners. Are there other congregations in town doing work on that sort of on incarceration, or is there a prison near where you are that you might look into doing some sort of prison ministry stuff? Are there broader UU resources for doing the kind of work that you're doing? Because capacity is always an issue. I have never met a UU congregation that says, well, we have more energy and money and people to work on this stuff than we could ever possibly use. We grow into whatever resources we have. I think we can be disproportionately powerful when we figure out how to strategically build those partnerships and not swim against a stream that's going in the other direction, but partner with other people, figure out where the energy is, and not always try and do those things from scratch. So that looks like knowing internally what's already working, but also, how can we play well with others that are already doing this kind of work in our community?
And how can we make use of other UU resources, I think is really important, because I think of, when you say incarceration, I think of what is the UU Service Committee doing around that work, or Church of the Larger Fellowship, which is going to be one of the organizations I'm working with next year. That's where a lot of UU prison ministry happens. So is there a way that folks in your congregation can partner with that work and somehow support that, be resources, be letter writers, somehow be in touch with people in prison that are not even in your community physically, but are far away, but are UUs that are in prison. So thinking about how do we think creatively and have an impact that might be way far away from where the congregation itself is too.
And can I just say how exciting it is that in the middle of May, you're now looking ahead at 3 meetings over the course of the summer to think about the year ahead. Like, kudos to you all for making plans and to having that already in place, because that allows you to be responsive without having to be reactive. And it allows you to, do the sort of thing that I made Kevin and Jack do for homework, but sort of, imagine what that arc would look like for the year and what the reasonable goals are given your capacity.
Because not all of our congregations do that, no matter what their size.
No kidding.
So, other thoughts, things came up for you, or Ashley?
Well, I was going to say, we're almost at time here.
Yeah. Any closing ideas or things?
Well, I have one thing. As you both expressed sort of some of your, I guess, ideas and concerns for next year, I'm just getting excited knowing that I get to work with you and hope to be both a resource and a tool and just support for you as you're doing your work where you are too. So, yeah. So I say that out loud and make sure that's very clear and vocal. I'm excited.
And I want to add a special flag, since both of you are in congregations that are not in the metro area, that a large chunk of Jack's work is going to be focusing on developing resources and helping our congregations in greater Minnesota get connected with each other and increase their capacity where they are in their local context. So keep your eyes peeled. There's going to be some really exciting stuff coming that we can hopefully walk with you in this journey along.
Well, and as we come to a close, I want to say thank you both for being here. You're 2 of those folks that, because you were both on these calls and in covenant groups, I got to get to know throughout the year. So this is my swan song in terms of the convening calls, but we still have our last covenant group meetings coming up this month. But I just wanted to say thank you so much for being a part of these.
And I want to lift up Kevin's really wonderful leadership and pioneering this sort of new era for MUUSJA, where we're connecting with each other virtually. He has bottom lines all of our convening calls as well as the covenant groups, and has just contributed tremendously to our work. And I think he's probably learned a few things along the way too. So we're lucky at MUUSJA to be able to have paid ministerial interns. And it is largely due to the support of our generous folks. So I'll put in a last pitch that if you're not a sustaining donor to MUUSJA yet, you get things like Jack and Kevin when you do that. And that's for everybody who's watching this after the fact too, not just the 2 of you who are on the call. But Kevin, we will miss you, and we are grateful for your contributions.
And to have a learning opportunity like this that is paid as a seminarian is also very, very amazing and unique. There's not a lot of these opportunities in the world. So it's one other way that Minnesota and MUUSJA is doing it right. So with that, I will close us out with some words, once again, from the Lifting Our Voices book from David Blanchard. And with that, I will actually have, I will let Jack extinguish our chalice, because there's 2 of us now. Do more then simply keep the promises made in your vow. Do something more. Keep promising. As time passes, keep promising new things, deeper things, vaster things, yet unimagined things. Promises that will be needed to kill the expanses of time and of love. Keep promising. So may it be. Have a good evening.
Thank you, everybody. And we'll see you in the fall for our next convening calls.
All right.
Take care, everyone.
Bye.